The night had settled over Maple Hollow like a thick, cold blanket, and the wind carried a bitterness that made the cheeks sting and the bones ache. Snow fell relentlessly, a flurry of white that covered the crooked fence posts, telephone wires, and empty roads in a soft, muffled silence. The town itself, huddled at the edge of the dark pine woods, seemed trapped in that quiet, as if holding its breath against the storm. Shop windows were frosted over, the streets nearly deserted, and even the street lamps seemed dimmed under the heavy cloud cover. It was late afternoon, though the sky had already darkened to a bruised violet, shadows stretching long and ominous across the ice-streaked roads. The cold bit deep, carrying the sharp metallic tang of frost and the comforting smoky scent of burning wood from distant chimneys. On the edge of town, along a narrow, slush-filled road leading toward the open fields, two small figures struggled through the snow. Leah Harper and her twin sister Lucy were only 8, but the world had already been harsh to them. Their thin bodies shivered under coats that had long since lost their warmth. Leah, just 5 minutes older, wore a moss-green coat missing 2 buttons near the chest, her dark chestnut hair falling in tangled strands across her pale cheeks. She walked with a stubborn lift of her chin, determined to pull her sister along through the icy road. Lucy, gentler and more cautious, clutched her sister's hand tightly, her hand-me-down navy coat fraying at the cuffs. Her large gray eyes darted nervously over the snowdrifts, scanning for trouble around every corner. Their boots were cracked, their socks wet, and hunger gnawed at them relentlessly. The girls had spent the day begging, moving door to door, hoping for crumbs or kindness. Most people had shut their doors without a word, polite or not. A kind baker had given them a stale roll. A clerk at the post office had pressed 2 apples into their hands. Beyond that, the world had nothing to offer. Now, trudging back toward the abandoned shed where they sometimes slept, both girls looked, worn and beaten by the day. Their breaths puffed out in little clouds that vanished instantly in the frigid air, and the light around them dimmed, swallowed by the early night. Then Lucy gasped, tugging sharply on her sister's sleeve. "Leah, look!" At first, Leah thought it was just another pile of snow by the roadside, but as they drew closer, the mound moved, a twitch. And then they saw the blood, a bright, cruel red on the whiteness. Leah's heart thudded painfully. A German shepherd lay sprawled on the snow, flanks heaving shallowly, its sable coat matted with ice, dirt, and dried blood. One of. Its hind legs bent unnaturally, the paw twisted at a terrible angle. Blood seeped into the snow, creating a crimson halo around its body. Its amber eyes opened briefly, filled with pain, and then closed again, accompanied by a soft, pitiful whimper. Lucy dropped to her knees, ignoring the cold that soaked her jeans. "He's hurt, Leah! He's dying!" she cried, pressing her tiny hands against his chest as if they could somehow stop the bleeding. Her tears froze almost immediately on her cheeks. Leah knelt beside her, eyes brimming, but forcing herself to stay strong. "It's okay, Lucy. We'll help him. We have to," she said, wrapping her thin arms around the dog's neck, whispering nonsense words that felt like comfort. The shepherd weakly licked at her sleeve, as though recognizing the warmth in the children's desperate hands. Their cries rose, carried far by the empty winter night, reaching the ears of a man driving a patrol car around a bend. Officer Daniel. Rowan stiffened, a familiar knot of grief tightening in his chest. 38 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, with pale blue eyes that had seen more sorrow than most could imagine, Daniel had patrolled Maple Hollow's roads for years. But since the highway accident that had taken his wife and daughter 3 years ago, he moved through life with a quiet, hollowed-out carefulness, following habit more than duty. He eased his cruiser to the roadside, headlights cutting through the falling snow. Stepping out, he braced against the cold wind and followed the cries. Around a drift, the sight froze him. Two ragged little girls clinging to a bleeding German shepherd as if it were the last thread holding them to the world. Daniel's throat tightened. Memories of his own lost child flashed painfully. He shook them away, forcing his focus back to the present. "Hey," he called softly, careful not to startle them. "It's okay. I'm a police officer. Let me help." The girls looked up, fear and hope battling in their eyes. Laya held her sister tighter, whispering a trembling, "Please, sir, he's going to die." Daniel knelt in the snow, examining the dog. Its injuries were grave, but the animal still breathed. Its heart, though faint, still beat. He reached forward in leather gloves, checking wounds carefully. The shepherd whimpered, but didn't resist. "You did good," Daniel said quietly, looking at the girls. "He's alive, but we need to get him to a vet now. Can you help me lift him?" Together, clumsy but determined, they wrapped the dog in a blanket Daniel kept in his trunk. He lifted the heavy animal into the back seat of the cruiser while the girls clambered in beside it, refusing to let go of its fur. Daniel closed the doors, slid behind the wheel, and headed toward town. The headlights cut through the falling snow, illuminating their frozen, hollow faces. Laya held the shepherd's paw, whispering fiercely. Lucy sat stiff, gray eyes fixed on its chest, silently counting each shallow breath. Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror, feeling a faint crack stir inside him, an ember of hope he hadn't felt in years. Far across town, in the warmth of Timberline Tavern, another story unfolded. Travis McCoy, heavy-set, flannel stretched over a large belly, boasted loudly to the drunken patrons. "You should have seen it," he slurred, a sneer, twisting his features. "Damn mutt in the road, truck rolled right over it, didn't even slow me down." The men laughed nervously, some looking away. Travis leaned back, arrogance thick. "Carl keeps the patrols in line. Frank handles the paperwork. Nobody can touch me." For years, he'd illegally cut pines from the hills, selling them for cash. Money bought silence. Threats guaranteed obedience. Back on the snow-laden road, Daniel's cruiser raced toward the town's veterinary clinic. The dog whimpered softly, head resting in Lucy's lap. Laya whispered urgent words of comfort, refusing to let the animal go. Daniel gripped the wheel, pressing harder on the icy road, snow whipping across the windshield, wipers squeaking in. Protest. Inside the cruiser, something fragile yet undeniable began to flicker. Hope. The patrol car's tires crunched over the ice, carrying them closer to warmth, to safety, to the chance of healing. The small brick clinic came into view, a beacon against the white night, its sign reading, "Maple Hollow Animal Care." Inside, the air was warm, faintly scented with disinfectant and hay. Dr. Megan Alvarez was just locking up for the night when a sharp knock echoed through the quiet building. She was in her mid-30s, with olive skin and dark hair pulled into a practical bun. Her white coat bore faint stains of iodine and dog fur that no amount of washing seemed to remove. Megan's eyes, sharp yet kind, narrowed as she saw Daniel standing. Outside, snow clinging to his uniform. The moment she noticed the bundle in his arms, a wounded German shepherd, blood soaking the blanket, her professional instincts snapped into place. Inside, "Quickly," she said, unlocking the door and ushering them in. Daniel carried the dog to the examination table, the twins trailing behind him like shadows. Megan donned gloves, her hands steady even as her eyes widened at the sight of the injuries. The dog's hind legs were twisted, bones fractured, blood matting the fur. "He's alive," she said after a quick check with her stethoscope. "But barely. If I don't operate now, he won't make it through the night." "Do it," Daniel replied without hesitation. Megan glanced at him, then at the children hovering by the table. "It's a complex surgery. Pins, plates, it will cost thousands." Daniel. "And even then, recovery will take months." Daniel's jaw tightened. He thought of his paycheck, already stretched thin by mortgage payments, and the bills that piled up from a house lived in by one man instead of three. But when he looked down at the twins, Laya gripping the dog's paw as if it were her lifeline, Lucy whispering, "Don't die. Please don't die." He felt the decision click into place. "I'll cover it," he said, his voice flat but resolute. "However much it takes." Megan hesitated, reading the deep lines of exhaustion etched into his face. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll prep the operating room. You?" She looked at the girls. "Wait outside. This will take hours." The twins burst into protest immediately. "No, we can't leave him." Laya's cheeks flushed red with emotion. "He'll be scared if we're not here." Lucy tugged at Megan's sleeve, her gray eyes pleading. Megan softened, crouching to their level. "Listen, he'll need quiet, and I'll need to focus. But I promise you can sit just outside the glass doors and watch. That way, he'll know you're near." The girls exchanged a glance, then nodded reluctantly. Daniel placed a hand on each of their shoulders, guiding them toward the waiting bench. His own heart twisted at the thought of them begging to stay. Children, who had likely never been allowed to hold on to anything without losing it. As Megan worked, scrubbing in, setting up the sterile instruments, anesthetizing the dog, Daniel sat in the waiting area, his large frame slouched on a chair that creaked under his weight. He rubbed his hands together, though not from cold. Memories pressed against his skull, unwanted yet relentless. 3 years ago, the icy highway west of Billings, his wife Emily and their daughter Grace driving home from visiting her parents. The call had come just before midnight. A drunk driver had swerved across the median, smashing into their car. Emily died instantly. Grace had lived for 2 hours. Daniel had arrived at the hospital just in time to hold her tiny hand as the machines flatlined. The driver, wealthy, connected, had walked free. Technical issues in the investigation, the prosecutor had said. A procedural error. Daniel knew what it meant. The man had people in his corner. Money slipped into pockets. Justice had been sold, cheap as whiskey. Since that night, Daniel had carried a silent vow. If he could not save his family, he would not fail others. Yet sitting here, watching 2 ragged children press their faces against the glass as the dog they loved was cut open and stitched back together, he felt the weight of failure all over again. Across town, the storm had settled into a steady snowfall. Travis McCoy pulled his dented pickup truck into the driveway of his ranch house. The headlights cast a sickly glow over the yard, cluttered with broken farm equipment and logs stacked illegally cut from the national forest. Travis was thick-set, his belly straining against his belt, his breath sour with whiskey. He yanked off his oil-stained jacket and tossed it into the trash barrel by the porch, grumbling. The jacket bore streaks of blood and grease from earlier in the evening. Inside, his wife Sharon McCoy stood in the kitchen. Sharon was in her late 30s. Her blonde hair pulled back loosely, her pale skin marked by shadows under her eyes. She had once been a lively woman, but years with Travis had dimmed her spirit. Her hands twisted the dish towel nervously as she asked, "What did you do tonight, Travis?" "You came home late again." "Mind your business," he snapped, kicking off his boots. "I heard the truck," Sharon pressed, voice trembling. "Did you hit something? I saw the blood on your coat." Travis turned, his face darkening. "I told you to shut up." When she persisted, whispering, "Please stop this. One day they'll catch you." He struck her across the face, sending her staggering against the counter. Sharon bit her lip hard to keep from crying out. Travis leaned close, his breath hot with liquor. "Nobody catches me, not while Carl and Frank are on my payroll, so you keep your mouth shut or you'll regret it." He stomped upstairs, leaving Sharon trembling in the kitchen. Alone, she touched her bruised cheek, eyes filling with tears, not only for herself, but for the creeping dread that one day his arrogance would destroy them both. Back at the clinic, the hours stretched long. Megan worked with quiet intensity, her brow furrowed as she drilled pins into fractured bone, aligning the shattered legs. Daniel watched through the glass, with the twins who had curled against him, their eyes heavy, but refusing to close. He found himself with an arm around each child, as if protecting them from a grief he knew too well. Finally, near midnight, Megan emerged, removing her gloves with a weary sigh. Her bun had come loose, strands of hair falling across her face. "He made it," she said simply. "He'll need months of recovery, but he has a chance." The twins threw their arms around her, crying with relief. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. As snow fell softly outside, the fragile spark of hope had been kindled. A decision had been made, and a life had been saved, but deeper battles were only beginning. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and wet fur, the hum of heaters filling the silence after a long night. Snow still pressed against the windows, muting the world outside. On the steel table lay the German Shepherd, bandaged and stitched, its breathing steadier now than it had been hours before. Two little girls sat nearby, their small faces pale from exhaustion, but shining with a fragile kind of hope. When the dog shifted, giving a faint groan, Lucy gasped and leaned forward, her braids brushing against the bandages. "He's alive," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. Laya, who had not let go of the animal's paw since the surgery ended, straightened and nodded. "He's a fighter," she declared. Her dark eyes glistened, but her tone carried a quiet certainty that belied her 8 years. "He needs a name. He can't just be Dog." Lucy's lips parted in surprise. A name meant ownership, permanence. She bit her lip, then said softly, "Ranger." Like the men who guard the forests, strong, brave. Laya considered it, then nodded firmly. "Ranger." As if understanding, the dog stirred, his amber eyes fluttering open briefly before closing again. Both girls giggled through their tears. For the first time in what felt like forever, the clinic echoed with the sound of children's laughter. Daniel Rowan stood by the doorway, watching. The sight stirred something deep in his chest. He had not heard such innocent laughter since before his daughter Grace had died. For a moment, his heart twisted painfully. But then, strangely, it softened. His phone buzzed, dragging him back to duty. He stepped into the hall, away from the children, and answered. It was Deputy Harlan Briggs, a grizzled man in his 50s who had served Maple Hollow for decades. Heron's voice was growly, carrying the static of the poor line. "Dan, we've got news from the accident site. Highway Patrol found more debris near the shoulder, green paint flakes, and get this, an oil-stained jacket." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Any ID on the vehicle?" "Not yet, but the flakes match a dark green pickup. Witness from 2 towns over swears he saw one speeding west last night. No plates." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Bag the jacket and send it to evidence. I'll pick it up. Back in." The clinic, Megan Alvarez finished checking the dog's vitals. She was still in her scrubs, hair escaping from its bun. Tired though she was, her gaze softened when she looked at the girls. Megan had worked with animals for years, but rarely had she seen such fierce loyalty from children. She noticed how Laya, though clearly starving, refused the crackers Megan offered until she had made sure Ranger had water. Lucy, gentler and more hesitant, tucked her half of a stale roll beneath the blanket near the dog's nose, whispering, "For later, when you're hungry." Something in Megan's chest tightened. She had grown up the daughter of Mexican immigrants, her childhood shaped by sacrifice. She knew the look of children who had gone without. Yet even in their deprivation, these girls gave the little they had to wounded creature. She crouched beside them, brushing a strand of hair from Lucy's cheek. "You two are remarkable," she murmured. "You care for him as if he's family." Isla's chin lifted stubbornly. "He is now," Daniel returned, carrying a sealed evidence bag. Inside, the jacket was stiff with dried oil and flecked with snow. The moment he entered, RER's ears twitched, despite the heavy bandages. His head rose weakly, nostrils flaring. Then, with surprising strength, the dog gave a deep, guttural bark that made the glass cabinets rattle. Both girls startled. Lucy clutched her sister's arm. "He knows that smell," she whispered. Daniel held the bag closer. Rears's bark deepened, sharp and insistent, until Megan put a calming hand on his shoulder. The message was clear. Whoever wore that jacket was the one who had nearly killed him. Daniel exchanged a look with Megan, then at the girls. His expression hardened. "We've got our first lead." Meanwhile, across town, Travis McCoy swaggered into the Timberline Tavern once again. The heavy-set logger wore a fresh jacket, his boots caked with snow and sawdust. His face was ruddy from whiskey, his beard unkempt, but his small eyes gleamed with smug self-assurance. Around him, the tavern buzzed with card games and diddle chatter. Travis slammed a wad of bills onto the bar, laughing loudly. Another round for everyone. Business is good. A few men cheered, others muttered. Travis thrived on the attention, puffing out his chest. He leaned toward a fellow logger. "You know why I sleep well at night? 'Cause when you share the pot, no one comes knocking. Carl makes sure patrols don't sniff around. And Frank, well, that man can make a forge permit look shinier than the real thing." The logger gave a wary glance around the room. "Careful, Travis. People talk." Travis smirked, slapping him on the back. "Let them talk. As long as my friends in high places get their cut, I could run this whole town from behind the wheel of my truck." He lifted his glass in a mock salute, his voice carrying across the smoky tavern. "To profits, gentlemen, to loyalty, and to knowing you'll never get caught if you pay the right hands." The men laughed uneasily, but in the corner, one younger patron frowned, finishing his drink quickly before slipping out into the snowy night. Back at the clinic, Daniel leaned against the wall, exhaustion pressing heavy on his shoulders. Megan approached, her expression thoughtful. "You look like a man who hasn't slept in days," she said gently. Daniel gave a humorless smile. "Try 3 years." Megan tilted her head, waiting. For a moment, he hesitated, but then the words came heavy as stones. He told her about Emily and Grace, about the drunk driver who had walked free because someone powerful had pulled strings. His voice broke only once, when he described holding his daughter's hand as her heart stopped. Megan's eyes softened with sorrow. She did not interrupt, did not offer platitudes. She simply placed a hand lightly on his arm. "I'm sorry, Daniel, truly." For the first time in years, Daniel felt the weight of grief shift. Not gone, but shared. On the bench nearby, Laya and Lucy had curled against each other, finally asleep. Ranger stirred faintly, his ears twitching in his dreams. Daniel looked at them at Megan and felt something stir within him. A fragile, hesitant miracle. A beginning. The wind cut through Maple Hollow like a blade, hissing down the narrow alleys and rattling the signs of shuttered shops. Inside the sheriff's station, Daniel Rowan sat at his desk long after the others had gone home. His eyes scanning reports under the dim glow of a desk lamp. He was careful. Each page he photocopied, each file he tucked away, he did so quietly, his ears tuned to the slightest creak of footsteps in the hall. The green pickup was the thread he needed to pull. But in this town, threads had a way of snapping before they led anywhere. As he slipped one final photograph into his folder, the door banged open. Sheriff Howard Clean filled the doorway, his bulky frame framed against the yellow light of the hall. Klein was a man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered with a thinning crown, of silver hair and a mustache that bristled like a broom. His uniform always seemed slightly too tight, buttons straining across his chest, and his eyes gray and sharp. "Missed little Rowan?" Klein said, his voice low but edged with authority. "I hear you've been sniffing around Travis McCoy's business." Daniel didn't move. Just following leads, Sheriff. We have a witness, a vehicle description, evidence. Klein slammed his palm on the desk. Drop it. That's an order. Daniel's jaw flexed. With respect, sir. A man like Travis doesn't get to run people off the road and walk away clean. Klein leaned closer, his breath thick with tobacco. Don't be naive. Travis has friends who can bury your badge before sunrise. You want to end up like those who tried before? Back off. The silence stretched heavy. Daniel forced himself to nod, though the fire in his chest burned hotter than ever. That night, the clinic was quieter than usual. Megan Alvarez had tucked the twins into a cot she had set up in the corner. They were fast asleep, their small bodies curled together beneath borrowed blankets. Ranger lay nearby on his bed of clean towels, bandages still covering his hind legs, his chest rising and falling steadily. Megan herself was wiping down the counters when a low growl rumbled through the room. Her head snapped up. Rares's ears had perked despite the stiffness of injury. His gaze was fixed on the door, his body trembling as he tried to rise. The growl grew into sharp barks, urgent and unrelenting. Lucy stirred, rubbing her eyes. "What is it, Ranger?" she whispered, frightened. Before Megan could answer, a shadow crossed the frosted glass window. A sharp knock followed. Then the thud of something heavy dropped just outside the door. Megan froze. She looked at Daniel, who had been dozing in a chair after his shift. He was already on his feet, gun-awe, eyes hard. Slowly, carefully, he opened the door. A burlap sack lay slumped against the threshold. Snowflakes clung to its edges. Daniel kicked. It opened with his boot, the contents spilling onto the floor. Papers, stamped invoices, contracts, receipts, all tied to lumber shipments, dates and signatures scrolled in Travis McCoy's heavy hand. Megan gasped. "What is all this?" Daniel crouched, his gloved hands sifting through the stack. His pulse quickened. They weren't just orders. They were fraudulent transport records, evidence of illegal logging, and they had been left here deliberately. Ranger barked again, teeth bared. Daniel glanced into the night, but the street was empty, the snow quickly covering any tracks. Whoever had dropped the sack knew Travis's business and wanted it in Daniel's hands. By dawn, Daniel had written an official report. His handwriting was precise, his stone measured, but his heart thundered as he sealed the documents. This was more than scraps of evidence. This was the first stone in a wall of proof. Still, he knew danger had only grown sharper. Someone was helping him from the shadows, and that meant someone else would want him silenced. Life inside the clinic shifted slowly toward warmth. Megan made stew that evening, filling the air with the scent of broth and herbs. The twins sat at the small wooden table, their faces glowing in the lamplight as they ate hungrily, spoons clinking against the bowls. After dinner, Megan pulled out old notebooks and pencils. She wrote their names carefully on a sheet. Laya Harper. "Lucy Harper, can you write this?" she asked gently. Laya frowned in concentration, gripping the pencil tightly as she scratched the letters. Crooked but determined. Lucy followed slower, her strokes hesitant but neat. Megan smiled, her heart swelling. "Good. Very good. You're learning." For the girls, the clinic was no longer a cold place of stitches and antiseptic. It had become a fragile home where a dog healed, where a kind woman taught them letters, where a weary policeman stood watch through the night. Across town, however, shadows deepened. Travis McCoy slammed his fist against the dining table, the dishes rattling. Sharon flinched, clutching the edge of her chair. She was a slender woman in her mid-30s with chestnut hair pulled back into a messy bun and eyes that had long ago lost their sparkle. Tonight they were rimmed red with fear. "You'll sign it," Travis barked, shoving a stack of documents across the table. "Put your name down. Make it look clean. That way, if anyone asks, it's your handwriting, not mine." Sharon shook her head, her voice trembling. "Travis, please. You're digging us deeper. One day someone will come asking questions. His open hand cracked across her cheek. She gasped, clutching her face. "You do as I say," he growled, looming over her, "or you'll regret it." When he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, Sharon sat motionless. Her hands shook as she reached into her apron pocket, pulling out a small digital recorder no larger than her palm. She pressed stop, the red light fading. For weeks, she had been quietly recording his rants, his deals, his threats. If he destroyed himself, she would have proof. Enough to protect herself, maybe even enough to bring him down. That night, as the snow piled high against Maple Hollow's roofs, Daniel Rowan stood by the clinic's window, folder of evidence under his arm. Behind him, Ranger stirred. The twins breathed softly in their sleep, and Megan hummed a lullaby as she cleared the dishes. The storm howled outside, but inside there was warmth, a fragile, flickering light that might one day burn bright enough to fight the darkness pressing in. And in Daniel's heart, a vow took shape. He would not back down. Not again. Snow still blanketed Maple Hollow, muffling the town in a hush that seemed almost conspiratorial. The winter sky hung low, heavy with clouds, and the street lamps glowed like weary sentinels against the dusk. Daniel Rowan sat in his patrol car, the heater hissing faint warmth. While he reviewed the notes he had gathered, his pen tapped against the folder, the rhythm sharp and restless. He had pieced together a picture that made his stomach churn. The illegal lumber shipments, the hush money, the green pickup truck seen by witnesses, it all pointed back to Travis McCoy. But Travis was not alone. Two names appeared again and again, whispered in corners of bars half written on receipts: Carl Yates and Frank Dawson. Carl Yates was the town's deputy sheriff, a man in his 40s with a square jaw and thinning blonde hair. On duty, he wore his uniform like armor, strutting with the air of someone untouchable. His voice carried an oily confidence, his handshake a little too firm, as if he constantly had something to prove. Around town, people said he had ambition, but lacked scruples. Frank Dawson, in contrast, was polished. The councilman in his 50s, with a neatly trimmed beard and silver-streaked hair, often wore tailored coats and polished leather shoes that stood out in a lumber town. He smiled easily, shook every hand at church on Sundays, and spoke about progress in meetings. But behind that polished image lay greed. Frank had investments in trucking companies that made him wealthier with every illegal log that left Maple Hollow. Daniel clenched his jaw. These were not just petty criminals. They were men with power, men who could make evidence vanish with a single phone call. That evening, back at the clinic, Megan Alvarez noticed the twins had dozed off in the cot once more. Ranger, though his legs remained swathed in bandages, dragged himself across the floor, his nails clicking softly on the tiles. With a determined grunt, he lowered his body beside the girl's bed, his great sable head resting across their feet. Lucy stirred in her sleep, her small hand drifting down into his fur. Laya shifted closer, murmuring faintly. Ranger let out a low, contented sigh, his amber eyes half closing, but never entirely. Megan's heart tightened. She had seen loyalty in animals before, but this bond was different. Ranger wasn't just healing. He was anchoring the children, becoming the family they desperately lacked. She brushed a strand of hair from Lucy's forehead, whispering softly, "He's yours as much as you are his." The next day, Daniel took a risk. He drove an hour beyond the county line to a state building in Helena, where snowplows roared down wide avenues and government offices loomed like fortresses. He entered the district attorney's office, his folder clutched tightly. The assistant, Attorney General, a woman named Clara Bennett, greeted him. She was in her late 30s with sharp hazel eyes behind rectangular glasses in a posture that radiated precision. Dressed in a charcoal suit, she spoke little, preferring to listen with an intensity that made Daniel feel both scrutinized and supported. When he laid the invoices and reports on her desk, she leafed through them carefully, her brow furrowing. "You realize," she said at last, "bringing this to me means you've bypassed your chain of command. That's dangerous." Daniel nodded. "With respect, ma'am, I don't trust my chain of command. My sheriff told me to stand down. Evidence keeps disappearing. Witnesses go silent. If I don't go above their heads, this case dies in Maple Hollow." Clara leaned back, tapping the edge of a page with her nail. "If what you've given me holds up, this isn't just about one thug with a pickup truck. It's systemic corruption. That means jurisdiction shifts to us. You'll have our backing, but it won't be quick. Build me a stronger case. Find me something undeniable." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Then I'll get you undeniable." That night, the storm pressed down harder, winds rattling the clinic's windows. Megan had just finished washing dishes when a soft knock came at the back door. Daniel, on edge from Helena, set down his mug and approached cautiously. When he opened the door, Sharon McCoy stood shivering in the threshold. Her face was pale, lips blue from the cold. A bruise still darkened her cheek where Travis had struck her days ago. She clutched her coat tight around her thin frame, her eyes darting nervously into the darkness behind her before locking on to Daniel's. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." Megan hurried to fetch her inside, guiding her to a chair near the stove. Sharon's hands shook violently as she fumbled in her pocket. Finally, she pulled out a small silver device, the digital recorder. Her voice broke. "I've been recording him. My husband, the things he says, the people he pays. If I give this to you, maybe you can stop him before he destroys everything." Daniel took the recorder gently, his thumb brushing over the worn plastic. "What's on it?" Her gaze dropped to her lap. Conversations. Proof that he paid Carl Yates to make charges disappear. Proof that Frank Dawson arranged the shipments. Proof that Travis ran that dog down and laughed about it afterward. Silence filled the room. Only the crackle of the stove broke it. Megan reached for Sharon's hand, squeezing it with quiet strength. "You did the right thing." Tears swelled in Sharon's eyes. "I'm so tired of living afraid. Do what you have to, Officer Rowan. Just make sure he can't hurt me anymore." Daniel slid their quarter into his pocket, his expression grim. "You have my word. This changes everything." Later, as the clinic quieted again, Ranger lifted his head from the twins' bed and let out a soft whine. Daniel stood by the window, staring out into the snowy dark, the weight of the recorder pressing against his chest. For the first time since this began, he felt the tide shift. The truth, long buried, was finally clawing its way to the surface, and with it came a chance, not just for justice for Ranger or the twins, but for Maple Hollow itself. The storm struck Maple Hollow with a ferocity that made the town shudder. Snow, lashed sideways in blinding sheets, coating rooftops and burying the narrow roads and drifts. The pine trees groaned under the weight, their branches snapping like bones in the cold. It was a night when most people stayed inside, curtains drawn tight, fireplaces roaring. But Daniel Rowan had no such luxury. The call had come in just after sundown. A green pickup truck, abandoned deep in the Pine Creek forest, had been spotted by a state patrol officer. The report matched exactly what Daniel had been waiting for. It wasn't just any vehicle. It was Travis McCoy's truck, the same one described by the twins and linked by a Rearse's furious barking to the oil-stained coat. Daniel buttoned his heavy parka, pulling his hat low. The fury of the wind clawed at his face as he prepared his gear. At the clinic, Megan Alvarez watched him carefully. Her dark hair pulled into a messy braid swung against her shoulder as she moved about the room. "Daniel," she said softly, "you're going out in this. The roads. I don't have a choice." He cut in gently, his voice rough but calm. "If we wait, Travis will vanish, and all we fought for will vanish with him. He glanced at the recorder in his pocket. Sharon's evidence. This is our chance. The twins were clinging to Ranger on his cot. Laya's wide eyes brimmed with worry while Lucy's lip trembled. The dog, though still bandaged, had raised his head, ears sharp, growling low as if he understood. "Can't Ranger come?" Lucy asked, her small hand resting on the dog's neck. Daniel crouched, his large frame casting a shadow over them. "Not this time, sweetheart. Ranger's brave, but he needs to heal. You stay with Dr. Alvarez. I'll be back before dawn." Megan touched his arm. "Just promise me you'll come back in one piece." Daniel managed a faint smile, though his eyes betrayed the storm inside. That's the plan. The operation was swift. By 9, Daniel had linked up with a team of state troopers in Pine Creek, men hardened by years of mountain patrols. Their leader, Captain Harris, was a grizzled veteran with iron-gray hair beneath his fur-lined hat. His lined face spoke of, too, many winters chasing fugitives through the wilderness. "Rowan," Harris greeted with a curt nod, his deep voice carrying over the wind. "We've got the perimeter locked down. Our K-9 units ready. You know the terrain better than my men. You'll take point." Beside him stood the K-9 officer, Sergeant Linda Crowley, a tall woman in her late 30s with keen blue eyes and a non-nonsense posture. Other side strained a muscular Belgian Malinois, its breath steaming in the cold, eyes burning with focus. Daniel adjusted his rifle strap. Travis knows these woods, too. He won't go easy. Harris gave a grim smile. "Good. I like when they run. Makes the catch more satisfying." They moved into the forest, boots crunching in the deep snow. The beam of Daniel's flashlight cut through the whiteout, illuminating clawing branches and animal tracks half buried in drifts. The Malinois pulled at its lead, nose down, catching scent. Minutes stretched like hours. The blizzard howled, disorienting. But then the dog stiffened, barking sharp and urgent. Ahead, through the pines, the dark silhouette of the green truck loomed, half buried under a growing mound of snow. Steam still hissed from its hood. Daniel raised his hand, signaling silence. The men fanned out, rifles ready. Footprints led away from the truck into the denser woods. "He's on foot," Harris muttered. "Then let's end this," Daniel said, his breath misting. Meanwhile, back at the clinic, the storm battered the windows so hard the glass trembled. Megan had set the twins by the fire, wrapped in blankets. Lucy whispered, prayers, her little hands folded, while Laya stared at the flames, biting her lip until it bled. Ranger, restless, struggled to his feet. Despite the pain in his legs, he limped to the window and let out a sharp bark, then another pacing in short, stiff circles. His amber eyes burned with instinct. He knew something was happening beyond the storm. "Easy, boy," Megan murmured, kneeling to stroke his head. But Ranger barked louder, throwing his voice against the wind like a drum of defiance. The twins pressed close to him, their fears finding a strange comfort in his refusal to be still. Out in Pine Creek, the chase intensified. The footprints veered downhill toward the frozen river. The K-9 lunged forward, baying as the troopers advanced. Daniel's boots slipped on ice crusted beneath the snow, but he kept pace, his pulse hammering. Then a figure stumbled into view, a large man in a dark coat hauling a heavy tarp-covered bundle. Travis McCoy. He cursed, glancing back, his beard rhymed. With ice, eyes wild. With a grunt, he shoved the tarp into the river, logs tumbling beneath the cover, illegal timber stripped and ready for transport. The evidence he had risked everything for now sliding under the ice. "Police, drop it." Daniel's voice cut through the storm. Travis bolted, branches whipped against his face as he charged through the snow. But the Malinois surged forward, teeth bared, dragging Sergeant Crowley like a live wire. Within seconds, the dog leapt, slamming into Travis's side. Both crashed into the snow. Travis roared, swinging a fist, but the troopers were already on. Him, pinning his arms, forcing him face first into the icy ground. "Get your hands off me," he spat, thrashing. "You don't know who I pay." Daniel knelt beside him, eyes cold as steel. "Not anymore, Travis." Harris cuffed the man with practiced ease. "You're finished, McCoy." The storm howled above them, but for Daniel, the night felt strangely still. The weight of weeks of lies, fear, and struggle began to lift. They had him alive. Hours later, long after Travis had been loaded into the back of a state patrol truck, Daniel returned to the clinic. His uniform was soaked, his face pale from the cold, but his eyes held something steadier than before. The door creaked open, and the twins rushed to him, throwing their arms around his legs. Megan let out a breath of relief, her hand covering her mouth. "Is it over?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "For tonight, Travis is in custody. The rest will come." Ranger let out a deep bark from his cot, tail thumping despite the pain. Daniel crossed the room, kneeling to rub his head. "We did it, boy. Couldn't have gotten here without you." The dog licked his hand, as if sealing the unspoken bond between them all. And though the storm raged on outside, inside the clinic there was warmth, a fragile hope that justice at last was within reach. Morning came pale and cold over Maple Hollow. The snow still piled high on the sidewalks and rooftops. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange silence that felt almost holy. But inside the county courthouse, there was no peace. The air buzzed with tension, papers shuffled, boots echoed against marble floors, and the scent of strong coffee lingered. Daniel Rowan sat at a long oak table, his posture straight, but his eyes weary from a night without sleep. Before him lay the arsenal of evidence he had spent weeks gathering, evidence that would finally unravel Travis McCoy's empire of fear. Spread across folders and evidence bags were the damning pieces: the oil-stained coat identified by Ranger, the traffic camera footage capturing Travis's green truck on the night of the hit and run, the forged freight invoices tied to illegal lumber shipments, and most importantly, the audio recordings Sharon had delivered, her trembling voice whispering through the static. Travis bribing Carl Yates and Frank Dawson, boasting about the friends who would always protect him. The county's courtroom was filled by mid-am morning. Reporters huddled with notepads, their breath fogging the frosted windows. Townsfolk, hungry for truth, crowded the benches. At the front stood Assistant State Attorney Rebecca Langley, a woman in her early 40s with auburn hair pinned tightly in a bun. Her sharp cheekbones and steady gray eyes radiated both authority and compassion. Langley had a reputation across the state for cutting through corruption like a scalpel. Methodical, unflinching, but always fair. She stood now arranging her papers with the calm of someone preparing for surgery. "Today," she said firmly, her voice echoing off the high ceilings, "we present charges against Travis McCoy, Carl Yates, and Frank Dawson. Charges include fraud, bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The people of this county deserve honesty. The law will provide it." Carl Yates, the deputy chief, sat stiff in his uniform, sweat beading his temple. Frank Dawson, once a polished councilman in his tailored suits, now looked pale and shrunken, and Travis, broad-shouldered, beard unkempt, eyes full of venom, slouched with an arrogance that had not yet accepted the fall. In a quiet room down the bay hall, Megan Alvarez stood beside Sharon McCoy, gently holding her hands. Sharon's auburn hair was loose for the first time in months, cascading over a pale blouse. Her skin still bore faint bruises along her wrist, remnants of Travis's cruelty. She trembled like a bird preparing for its first flight. "I don't know if I can do this," Sharon whispered. Her voice cracked under the weight of years of silence. "You can," Megan assured her. Her dark eyes shone with both compassion and conviction. "You've lived under his shadow long enough. Every word you speak today cuts the chains, not just for you, for every woman too afraid to stand up." Sharon lifted, her gaze, hesitance wearing with the flicker of newfound strength. What if they call me a liar? What if he glares at me the way he used to? Then look past him, Megan said firmly. Look at Daniel. Look at the girls. Look at Ranger. He isn't your master anymore, Sharon. You are stronger than his threats. A long silence passed. Then Sharon inhaled shakily. Then I'll speak. The trial session resumed. Witnesses were called. The state patrol officer who had spotted the truck, the technician who authenticated the invoices, the traffic analyst who confirmed the vehicle's movements. One by one, the pillars of Travis's defense crumbled. Then came Sharon. She stepped into the witness stand, shoulders trembling, but chin lifted. Travis smirked at her from the defendant's table, mouthing words only she could see. But this time she did not flinch. Her voice shook at first, but steadied with each word. She told of years of control, the slaps and threats, the whispered deals she overheard. Then came the recording. Langley pressed play, and Travis's growly voice filled the courtroom. Yates gets his cut. Dawson signs off the papers and we're clean. Nobody in this town touches me. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Reporters scribbled furiously. The audience murmured, and Carl and Frank visibly palled. Sharon closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. But when she opened them again, there was fire there. She had broken the silence, and with it, Travis's grip on her soul. Outside the courthouse, a different kind of recognition was happening. Ranger, though bandaged, had been brought on a short leash by Megan so the twins could stay calm while waiting for news. The German shepherd sat upright, ears perked, amber eyes sharp. Children and townsfolk gathered around him. Some whispered in awe, others reached tentatively to pat his head. "Is it true?" a boy asked. That has sniffed out the coat and wouldn't stop barking. Lucy, clutching Rares's collar, nodded with pride. "He saved us. He always knows." Word spread quickly. By evening, local papers were already calling Ranger a silent witness, a hero whose instincts had pierced through lies where humans faltered. Though he could never stand in a witness box, his presence weighed heavily in the story that unfolded. Meanwhile, Daniel had one more duty weighing on his heart. He had spoken with Langley privately, and now he carried a thin folder in his hands. Inside were the adoption papers, his official petition to take guardianship of Laya and Lucy. That night, after the hearing adjourned, he sat with the twins by the fire in Megan's clinic. The flames painted their small faces with a golden glow. "Girls," he began softly, "there's something I want to ask you." Laya tilted her head. "Is it about Travis? Is he going to jail forever?" "Yes," Daniel said with certainty, "but this isn't about him. This is about you. You've been through things no children should ever face. I can't take away the past, but I want to give you a future." He opened the folder, showing the papers. "I want to be your guardian. If you'll have me, I want you to live with me. I'll protect you, raise you, and make sure you always feel safe." Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "Does that mean you'll be our dad?" Daniel's throat tightened. "If that's what you want me to be." The twins exchanged a look, their bonds silent and unbreakable. Then they both nodded, throwing their arms around him. Daniel held them close, feeling the weight of both burden and blessing settle into something new. A family. The courthouse bell chimed 9 times as the winter sun broke through scattered clouds, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Inside, the room was packed once again. Townsfolk, reporters, law students from the nearby university, all drawn by the spectacle of justice that had gripped Maple Hollow. For weeks, whispers of corruption, violence, and betrayal had circulated. Now it was time for sentences to be spoken aloud, binding and final. At the front bench sat Judge Eleanor Whitmore, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tidy bun. Her black robes draped neatly, but her steel blue eyes gave nothing away. Whitmore was respected for her impartiality, her measured tone, and her refusal to be swayed by theatrics. She had presided over both murder trials and minor disputes with the same unshakable hand. Today, she carried the burden of ensuring that Maple Hollow knew the law was not for sale. Travis McCoy stood first, shackled at the wrists. The once brazen logger had grown thinner during his weeks in custody, but his eyes still burned with defiance. His beard was patchy, his hair unkempt, his posture defiant, even as guards held him firm. Judge Whitmore's voice rang out clear. "Travis McCoy, you are found guilty on multiple counts: felony hit-and-run, illegal timber trafficking, bribery of officials, and animal cruelty. Considering the severity and breadth of your crimes, this court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison. You will also be barred from holding any commercial licenses upon release. Do you understand this sentence?" Travis snarled under his breath, his shoulders tightening, but he nodded curtly. A hush swept the courtroom as the weight of the words settled. Next came Carl Yates, the disgraced deputy chief. His uniform had been stripped from him weeks earlier. Today he wore a plain brown suit that hung loosely on his frame. Once broad and commanding, Carl now seemed diminished, like a statue toppled from its pedestal. "Carl Yates," Whitmore continued, "as an officer of the law, your duty was to protect. Instead, you abused your authority, accepted bribes, and concealed criminal acts. For these offenses, you are sentenced to 10 years in state prison and stripped of all titles, pensions, and privileges associated with your former office." Carl's lips quivered. He lowered his head, shame settling heavy across his shoulders. Then Frank Dawson rose, histy crooked, his once polished demeanor replaced with nervous twitching. The councilman had built his career on handshakes and promises, but his name now lay in ruins. "Frank Dawson," Whitmore said firmly, "you orchestrated fraudulent paperwork, misused public trust, and aided criminal operations for personal gain. For corruption, forgery, and conspiracy. This court sentences you to 12 years in state prison. You are barred from ever holding public office." Frank exhaled sharply, his pale skin glistening with sweat. His gaze darted around the room, searching for sympathy, but finding none. Finally, the judge turned her attention to Sharon McCoy. The courtroom softened, shifting from anger to compassion. Sharon sat with her hands folded in her lap, her auburn hair framing a face both worn and newly free. Mrs. McCoy, Whitmore addressed her gently. "Your testimony was critical in unveiling the truth. This court formally grants you full protection under state law. Restraining orders will be enforced. You are released from all financial liabilities tied to Mr. McCoy's business. You are free to return to your profession and rebuild your life in safety." Sharon's lips trembled as tears welled in her eyes. She nodded quickly, pressing a hand to her chest as if holding her own heart steady. The gavel struck once, echoing through the chamber like thunder. Justice at last was written into the record. Months passed. Winter surrendered to spring, and the streets of Maple Hollow thawed beneath budding trees. The courthouse whispers faded, replaced by talk of planting season and school fairs. In Megan Alvarez's clinic, life had taken on a quieter rhythm. The sterile cold building had become something warmer, curtains sewn by Sharon hung by the windows, children's drawings taped along the hallway, and at the heart of it all was Ranger. 5 months after his surgery, the German Shepherd still bore the memory of pain. His left hind leg carried a permanent limp, each step uneven. Yet his spirit remained unbroken. The twins often coaxed him into short walks, cheering as he clambered across the yard, his amber rays alive with determination. To them, the limp was not weakness. It was proof of his courage. At night, he would curl at the foot of their bed, his head resting on Lucy's knees, his tail occasionally thumping against Laya's blankets. His breathing, steady and protective, became the lullaby that carried them into sleep. Daniel Rowan, meanwhile, was learning a new rhythm himself. After weeks of paperwork and home visits from social services, the adoption became official. One bright morning, he stood in the county office with Leia and Lucy, signing his name beneath the words, "Legal Guardian." The twins clung to his hands, their eyes wide with disbelief and joy. "You're ours now?" Lucy asked, as if afraid the words might vanish. Daniel knelt to meet their gaze, his strong frame softening with emotion. "No, girls, you're mine forever." The paperwork was a formality. The bond had already been sealed in the nights of fear, the days of waiting, the shared courage that had carried them all through. But now it was written in law, undeniable and permanent. Megan stood nearby, smiling, her dark hair loose over her shoulders. Her presence had become a constant, helping with homework, cooking meals, laughing with the girls, walking Ranger. Though unspoken, her place in the family was already certain. One evening, as autumn winds rattled the windows again, the family gathered around the fireplace. Sharon had stopped by with a basket of bread she baked herself. The twins sat cross-legged on the rug, tracing raises with their small fingers. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his arm resting lightly on the armrest where Megan's hand soon joined his. From the radio on the mantel came a familiar announcer's voice. Today, the State Department of Corrections confirmed the sentences for Travis. McCoy, Carl Yates, and Frank Dawson remain unchanged after appeals. Officials state this marks a turning point for Maple Hollow's commitment to transparency and justice. The twins looked up at Daniel, their eyes bright with the reflection of the fire. He smiled faintly, drawing them close. Ranger shifted, resting his head across both girls' laps, his eyes half-lidded in contentment. The fire crackled, the wind howled outside. But within the clinic turned home, warmth reigned. Justice had been delivered. More importantly, love had been restored. And in that circle of light, broken pieces had come together. Not perfectly, but beautifully enough to last. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not thunderbolts from the sky, but quiet mercies. An injured dog who refuses to give up. A pair of children who dare to hope again. A family rebuilt from the ashes of pain. In their journey, we see how God's hand works through courage, kindness, and love, reminding us that even in the darkest nights, His light still guides us home. May this story inspire you to believe in second chances, to look for the hidden blessings in your own daily struggles, and to never lose faith that love can heal all wounds. If this touched your heart, please share this story. Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you can walk with us through more journeys of hope. And as you close this video, may the Lord bless you and your loved ones with peace, strength, and the quiet miracles that turn ordinary days into extraordinary gifts. Yes,